May I leave now? Myra gestured to the ring on his hand. Richard asked, "Where to?" "It's not on the way." Seeing that he had let go, Myra quickly ran off, disappearing like a wisp of smoke. Black Panther wanted to stop her, but Richard simply said indifferently while looking at her back, "It's time for us to return to the capital." Black Leopard watched Myra run off into the distance before he asked in surprise, "You don't want to know where she went?" Richard replied in a reassuring tone, "She's wearing my ring, so she won't be able to escape." "But you were the one who hid your aura. What will you do, having given it to her?" Black Panther asked in confusion. "If others find out too early that she's an element body, then she's dead," said Richard, relaxed as could be. "So we have to hide the spiritual energy in her body and make them think she's a soul master." When Myra entered the city, the sky wasn't dark yet. Just like 2 days ago, she was wearing a mask. It wasn't because she feared others looking down on the chances of her being recognized were too high. After putting on her mask, she first went to the pharmacy to buy medicinal herbs and peeled furnaces. Since there were many rare medicinal herbs, the owner needed to gather them. While waiting, she took the opportunity to eat at the restaurant opposite the pharmacy. This restaurant's location was good, and the business wasn't bad either. Many people were sitting around her, and all of them were talking about the uproar caused by her. Myra was happy to join in on the fun, eating while listening to the discussions. "Have you heard? Myra disgraced the Spear Mansion's young miss, so when I passed by their house today, all I saw were several servants." "Then did the Rogers family cancel the engagement?" "The Rogers family is buried in embarrassment today. How could they even think to cancel the engagement?" "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Someone who didn't know anything stepped forward to ask. The sixth young master of the Rogers family had been defeated by Myra, and the marriage was even annulled. Now that the Rogers family has gone out to show off, they can't afford to lose face. How is that possible? Leon's a genius. How can a nobody like Myra hope to beat him? Rumor has it that Myra is a soul master. If I must say so, it makes sense. How could the Watt family produce a nobody after all? The Rogers family has no eyes at all. As Myra listened to these conversations, she began to chew on the peanuts. From today onward, her name, Myra, would be linked with the genius. A newly added guest said, "I've just returned from the Rogers family residence. The steward has instructed me to postpone my engagement for a few days before sending the pork over. I'm going to marry the Spears family's young miss." Myra was a little surprised. The Leon she knew wasn't the type to be emotional, and he craved respect more than anything. How could he possibly marry Carol, the very woman who had caused him to lose face? At the same table, someone else asked the same question. This time, the pork delivery man expressed that he didn't know either. Someone else came over and said, "You probably don't know about this, but 5 days from now, Hudson Academy and the Royal College in the capital are both recruiting students, and the Royal College is plentiful. But other than those with high talent, the ones who can enter are nobles. So think about it." They had to understand that Myra didn't want to know, but she did. Other than talent, resources were essential to the progress of cultivation, and Royal College had been established by the royal family, so there was no need to mention how abundant the resources were. She believed that Leon had married Carol in order to enter the Royal College. As long as they were strong enough, beautiful women would be everywhere. Admission to the academy? She turned the teacup, and the corners of her mouth curled into a smile. She was in need of a haven. Wasn't this the perfect academy? Just as she was thinking, The shop assistant from the pharmacy ran over and gave her the medicine she requested. Myra saw the medicinal ingredients and returned to her room after settling the bill. Since she was going to appear in front of others using a brand new image, the first thing she had to do was change her face. Her injuries weren't that serious. Myra only needed to find a random Tier 3 alchemist to refine a Grade 3 face-preserving peel for her, and she'd make a full recovery. Since the requirements in this world were so many, an alchemist had to be a soul master, which eliminated the majority of people. Soul techniques were also divided into 8 main divisions, with only the Fire Soul Master being able to become an alchemist. Approximately 1/8 of the population. However, only a very small number of people had met the requirements for physical fitness. The most crucial point was a very high level of mental control. Therefore, only a few people in Carol's world could become an alchemist. To begin with, to become an alchemist, one had to go through a long and arduous process, including intensive studies. It would take several decades before one could become a true alchemist. Although it was difficult, once one became an alchemist, tens of millions of people would respect him or her. All the hardships endured would be rewarded tenfold. The element body is related to the 8 elements, so such an individual could be said to represent a complete soul master. Although Myra's original body was physically weak, her mental control had been strong, so Myra's current body could become an alchemist. As for the matching of medicinal herbs, in her past life, she'd been a medical saint, and her mother had left behind pills ranging from Tier 1 to Tier 9. She could just follow the instructions. However, refining medicine was no simple task. She could only give it a few more tries without anyone teaching her. There were still 5 days left until the recruitment in the capital began, so she didn't have much time left. She had to make good use of it. She meditated until the power she had expanded during the day recovered before taking out the bronze triangle-shaped peel furnace she had bought earlier. She placed the peel furnace in her left hand before casting her soul technique. As she held up the peel furnace, a flame slowly rose in her palm. Her other hand began to pour in the medicinal herbs according to the sequence recorded in the peel formula in her memory. At the same time, she used her mental energy to control the size and density of the flames. After all, Myra had never trained in this area before, and her first attempt very quickly failed. "My money!" She howled at the sky. However, it was difficult for Myra to defeat him. After a short rest, she started to try again. The truth was that the peel concocting was much more difficult than she had imagined, especially with no one to guide her through it. Thus, she confined herself to her room for the next few days. On the 3rd day, when the waiter was serving water, he heard a cheerful cry from the room. He was so frightened that he knocked on the door and asked what was happening. "It's fine. The young lady's happy. Here's your reward." A soft voice floated out, and the waiter saw the door open. A gold coin flew out, and he caught the door, proceeding to quickly close it. But he didn't see the person inside. "Thank you, miss," said the waiter, eyes turning gold. If he had entered, he would have been even more shocked. Myra was seated gracefully on the dresser, with a face in the bronze mirror that could make any woman jealous. Her skin was like crystal, and her eyes looked to belong in a painting. Her nose was high and delicate. Her cheeks bore the hue of ripe plums, and her red lips were like petals. Overall, her face possessed peerless beauty Just a casual glance from her would be enough to captivate one's soul. The heck? With such a face, I can just rely on this to survive. What's the use of having talent? The capital of the Hudson Kingdom was even more crowded than usual. As the two best academies in the kingdom, the Hudson Academy and Royal College, would begin recruiting students for the new year tomorrow. On this continent, strength was everything, and the best way to obtain strength was to receive good teaching. So even if these people tried their best to push their way through, they wouldn't miss the chance to enter an institution of higher learning. At the end of the busy street, a green-clothed youth walked over. His skin was fair, and his facial features were exquisite. His eyes were bright like stars, and as his gaze shifted away, the street seemed to darken. The surrounding people glanced at him, and a few women who peeked at him blushed. However, when they saw that he didn't have any badge on his chest, they couldn't hide their disappointment. The man had a look of disdain on his face as he thought, "What's the use of having good looks?" He subconsciously stuck out his chest, afraid that others wouldn't be able to see the badge representing his cultivation level. The youth didn't pay attention to their small movements. He stood on the street and said, "I'm back." That was none other than Myra, who had changed into a man's attire. To make it more realistic, she had even refined an impersonating power peel, thus concealing her female characteristics and adding a few centimeters to her height. However, due to her limited abilities, the peel could only be used for half a month. If she wanted to maintain her male identity, then she would need to retake the peel after half a month. The last time she stepped foot in this land had been 8 years ago. Back then, she was a little girl, and her family had recently abandoned her. Now that she had returned, she would appear before the Walt family with talent even greater than when she was born. What would their expressions look like? She wondered. "Young master, I beg of you, please save my mother." Pulling out of her daze, she heard a girl begging nearby. She looked in the direction of the voice and saw a group gathered in front of a medicine store. The sound had come from the crowd. Myra walked over without a word. She had 2 hobbies in her life, and one of them was poking her nose into other people's businesses. There weren't many people surrounding her. In front of her were a few young girls shopping. "Beauty, give way," she said, patting one of the girls on the shoulder. The young lady was attracted by the name, but when she saw Myra, she immediately nodded her head, not knowing how to react. Myra thanked her and pushed up to the front. There, she saw a man in his early 20s kneeling, and a girl who looked only 13 or 14 years old begging him to save her mother. "What's so great about the homely mother of yours? Obediently come back with me. I guarantee you a good life." The man's voice was filled with impatience, but he did his best to coax the girl. The gaze with which he looked at the girl was so greedy that it made Myra feel sick to her stomach. "No, my mother is still alive. Please save her. I will serve you well and repay you in the future if you help me." With that, the girl grabbed the man's leg and begged him, bursting into tears. It was only then that Myra noticed a woman lying on the medicinal store steps. Coarse clothes covered her body, and with one glance, Myra could tell that the family wouldn't have the money to treat any serious illness. "I don't have the money to save her. I thought highly of you, so I wanted you to come back and serve me." "Don't refuse a good thing," said the man, now losing his patience. It was obvious that he was a young master from a wealthy family who was used to talking down to others. "Young master, don't be like this. As long as you save my mother, I will do anything." The girl cried even harder. "How ignorant. Bring her back to me and properly train her." The man waved his hand, and a few men came forward to grab the girl. "Stop." Myra really couldn't watch any longer. After speaking up, she walked over to the young master and said, "You scum. Her mother's life is at stake, yet you still want to snatch this child. Are you a heartless beast? How dare you interfere with my business, boy? Do you not want to live any longer?" Myra glared and said sternly, "Get out of my way. A noob who doesn't even have a rank can learn from others to fight against injustice. Kid, is your brain damaged?" The man laughed mockingly, not moving in the slightest. The servants around him were also laughing wildly. "You're the one with the death wish," said Myra. While speaking these words, she waved her hand, and the wind elements immediately formed into a sharp blade in front of her, howling and cutting toward the man's waist. The man turned pale with fright, as he had nowhere to dodge. In a moment of desperation, he could only roll on the ground, rolling around in the mud. But even so, Myra's sudden movement caused the belt on his pants to break, further increasing his humiliation. "Instant cast of rank 3? Someone said. "Is she actually a soul instructor?" Everyone present was shocked by this move of Myra's. A third-rank soul technique wasn't that difficult. It could be performed by a primary soul master, but the prerequisite was that it had to be brewed quickly. And to be able to do this, one had to be a high-ranking soul master or teacher. Until now, the youngest soul teacher in the kingdom was 30 years old. But from the looks of it, this young man was only a teenager. Everyone figured that he must be some sort of prodigy. The two old men who were drinking coffee on the second floor were shocked. When they beheld this scene, they suddenly stood up. One of them was stroking his beard so enthusiastically that hairs were falling to the floor. What Myra wanted was this very kind of misunderstanding on their part. Taking advantage of their shock, she walked over to the woman and extended her hand to check her breath. The girl immediately ran over and knelt down beside Myra. There, she pleaded, "Young master, I know you're a good person. As long as you save my mother, I'll serve you." "Enough. Don't regard yourself as so worthless." Myra then shouted toward the medicine shop, "Come and save this woman. I have money." When the pharmacy's employees heard Myra's words, a doctor immediately ran out to treat the woman's illness. Forget about her being rich. Even if a talented person like her didn't have the money, the pharmacy still wouldn't dare to offend her. The doctor was also a soul master. He could use his mental power to detect the bodily damage. "I'm sorry, young master, but this is a case of consumption that requires years to recover from. It's extremely difficult to save someone in this position. and she's already on her last legs. I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. Impossible, cried the girl, not waiting for Myra to speak. There must be a way. Aren't you all physicians? The doctor waved his hands apologetically and walked back into the shop. The little girl knelt on the ground in despair, her wails making people feel uncomfortable. Myra didn't want to reveal too many of her abilities, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel the veins of the woman. Yet, it was immediately clear that at her current level, there was nothing she could do to help her. Seeing the woman take her last breath, she stood helplessly and patted the little girl's shoulder without saying a word. When the man who made things difficult for the little girl saw Myra's gaze fall on him, he immediately ran off, holding his pants up. Wicked he was, but far from stupid. Myra helped the little girl bury her mother, and it was already dusk by the time the job was complete. One of the two older men was fat, and the other man was thin. Both of them were brimming with vigor and vitality as they stared at Myra in awe. The thin old man was the first to speak as he looked at Myra with unconcealable anticipation. Hey, are you here to enroll in the academy? Myra glanced at him and asked, Who are you? The skinny elderly man replied, I was so happy that I forgot to introduce him. The fat old man quickly said, What I'm called isn't important. I'm the principal of Royal College. You can call me Dean Zanello. And me, I'm Director Ballman from Hudson Academy, said the skinny elderly man, not to be outdone. The two men stared at each other, one big and one small, looking like some kind of comedy duo. Myra inhaled a breath of cold air. The two elderly gentlemen were famous indeed. Their disciples were everywhere, and their status in the community was extraordinary. Although they didn't have any official title, even the officials would have to be respectful to them. I've heard a lot about you two deans, but I wonder why you're looking for me today. Although Myra asked this, she could of course guess that these two people had seen her little performance on the street earlier that day. Otherwise, given their status, they wouldn't have condescended to come here. Look at your age. Coming to the capital at this time, you must be looking to study. Do you have any interest in entering Hudson Academy? The skinny old man was the first to speak. Before Myra could reply, the fatty quickly said, If you want to come, then come to our Royal College. Our Royal College is at least 10 times richer than the resources of their Hudson Academy, and it's even more suitable to cultivate talented students like you. Myra shook her head. Forgive me, I'm not a noble or even a commoner, so I can't enter Royal College. The skinny old man smiled and said, Then it just so happens that you're coming to our Hudson Academy. There are children like you who wish to change their fates there. You'll definitely get along well, and I'll make an exception and provide you with additional resources. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're not a noble. I can make an exception for a genius. The fat old man exclaimed fervently. Although he'd never done such a thing before, he was willing to give it his all to convince Myra. Looks like the rules are really set for the weak. Once a person has power, they can break any rule they please. Myra said with a mocking expression. Leon hadn't hesitated to marry Carol, who had ruined Myra's face in order to enter the Royal College. If he knew that this rule could actually be easily trampled on, how would he feel? Geniuses shouldn't be restricted. Young man, come to our Royal College. We will definitely create a good environment for you to grow up in. The fat old man saw that Myra seemed to want to make a move, and he began to lay it on even thicker. The skinny old man stared at him anxiously, but he had nothing to say. Although there were very few people at the Royal College, which was why the resources were so abundant, they were all good-for-nothings. As for the Hudson Academy, although it was run by the royal family, there was no one to support it. It was aimed at accepting students from the commoners, so it lacked resources. Even the same genius would have far less strength compared to the Royal College students. In this manner of comparison, there was really no way to compete. Before, Myra didn't want to have any sort of relationship with the Walt family, so she only wanted to go to Emerald Academy. But now that she had this opportunity to obtain more resources, she naturally couldn't let it go. The Royal College is very good, Myra said indifferently. The fatty's face had already turned into a smile, unfolding like a chrysanthemum. There are plenty of people who don't like it, but it doesn't matter. After saying that, she turned her head toward Dean Zanello and said, I'll be registering for the examinations in the next few days. Thank you, Headmaster. I'm sorry, Mr. Ballman. Thank you for your hospitality, but I have no choice but to prepare for myself, Myra said respectfully to the skinny old man. The skinny old man saw her actions, and although he felt regretful, he also said, Child, you really do need good resources. The two of you are both top talents. This old man will feel gratified with your future accomplishments. The fat old man was wild with joy. With a wipe of his hand, he took out a golden scroll and handed it to her. This is the privilege that I give to a special student. When the time comes, you can just go and register. You don't need to take the exam. Thank you, said Myra, taking the book and leaving. Lad, I still don't know your name. The fat old man shouted from behind him. Myra. When Fatty heard the name, his pupils constricted. He mumbled, Why does that name sound so familiar? You'll become the most dazzling genius among your batch of students in the future. Of course you've heard of him, the skinny old man said sourly. No, I've heard of it before. It seems that 15 years ago, there was a genius of the Watt clan who had the same name. Fatty recalled. Which Watt family? Who else could it be? The Hudson Empire's #1 noble family. You mean it could be the same person? I don't think so, because it was a baby girl, and she can't cultivate after that. The fatty sighed. What a pity. Otherwise, it would definitely be another glory for my Royal College. You're too greedy, let me tell you this, said Ballman. Don't be too happy too early. We have good seedlings this year as well. Then we'll all meet on this year's competition field. Who's afraid of you? Walking out of the tomb, Myra said to the little girl, Is there anywhere you want to go? I'll accompany you there. The little girl's eyes started tearing up as she timidly asked, Do you not want me? Myra was a little confused. I didn't mean it that way. I really didn't do anything for you either. You don't need to talk about repayment. Father passed away in the army a few years ago, leaving Mother and me. Those relatives saw us grieve and abandoned us. I don't have anywhere to go now." As the little girl said this, her tears began to fall anew. Myra wiped the little girl's tears and assured her, "Don't cry. I won't leave you behind. Let me think of how to settle this dilemma." The little girl pursed her lips and didn't say a word. Tears kept flowing from her forlorn eyes as she looked at Myra. "I'm already afraid of you. Follow me first. If you have a suitable place in the future, I'll help you settle in." Myra promised the little girl since she couldn't abandon her, she would help others till the end. "Thank you, young master. I'll do my best." The little girl squeezed her hand to express her gratitude. The nervous expression on her face was finally gone. The little girl was afraid of being bullied. If she knew where she was going, she wouldn't be able to escape her fate, and only by following Myra would she feel at ease. However, at this moment, she could never have imagined that her choice today would completely change the trajectory of her life. Myra wanted to tell her not to be so polite and call her big sis, but this appearance was a bit inappropriate for that. Although it didn't matter if she told her who she really was, there would be plenty of time for that, and she hadn't even changed her name. If her words were to slip, people would easily think that she was the legendary Myra. Myra weighed the situation for a moment before saying, "If you follow me, don't take me for granted. I'll treat you as my younger sister. That much I can promise you." "How can this be?" The little girl felt overwhelmed, prepared to burst with gratitude. "It's fine as long as I say it is. Besides, I'm not afraid of others, so I'll do whatever I have to do. If something happens, I'll support you," Myra said, stroking her head. Even if she was used to class status, she was still modern to the bone. Looking at the little girl, who had suffered so much and was trembling in fear, she indeed felt sorry for her. "Young master, you've treated me so well. In the future, I'll definitely—" "Stop." Myra made a gesture to stop her, realizing that changing people's minds wasn't easy. She could only say, "All right, we'll still be together for a long time. So take it easy with the debt talk, hmm?" As she said that, she patted the little girl's head. The little girl nodded and her cheeks flushed. "You were born in the wrong place. If it was us, you would definitely be a goddess in the eyes of the masses." As Myra walked, leading the way, she found herself lost in thought. Though she didn't care much for the world, she was very satisfied with her new face. Difficult though it was to adapt to her male identity. But when she saw that the little girl looked like she wanted to say something, Myra thought that something wasn't right and changed her tone. "What is it?" she asked. "If the young master doesn't have enough money, one room is fine too." After telling the owner to give them 2 rooms, Myra pulled the little girl over and reprimanded her. "Silly child, you can't get used to being treated in this manner. It's easy for people to take advantage of you, okay?" The little girl nodded as if she understood and asked, "Will the young master take advantage of me?" "Call me your brother," said Myra. "Of course I won't, but I can't guarantee that others won't have any ideas about you." "I won't help others then," said the girl, trying her best to sound adult-like. Myra replied as she coughed, "It's fine as long as you aren't tricked. Now go to sleep." The little girl nodded obediently, and the two of them went to rest upstairs. Early the next morning, students with innate talent testing in the Royal College queue had already lined up in front of the courtyard. There were hundreds of people in each row, which was a rule of Royal College. Myra was shocked by the scene when she walked over with the little girl, as she saw the people in embroidered clothes standing together in a queue, and the visual impact was quite strong. However, she'd been allowed to bypass this process, so she didn't need to queue up. Just as she was about to enter, she heard a delicate voice call out from behind her. "Brett, don't you see that the line is to the side? Stop blocking my way." When the little girl heard the voice, she immediately moved to get out of the way. But Myra stopped her and turned to look at the person. The girl looked to be about 16 to 17 years old. She was dressed in pink, and her exterior was pretty, but her expression was extremely arrogant. She raised her chin as if she didn't care about anyone else. Yet Myra's mouth was even more venomous. "I don't want to argue with you, so shut your mouth wisely, or else I'll beat you so badly that even your mother won't recognize you." She was used to being arrogant and didn't have the habit of swallowing her anger. "You dare talk to me like that? Don't you know who I am?" said the girl in an incredulous tone. Myra raised her eyebrows, fairly certain that this girl was in the habit of offering up unsolicited self-introductions. "Country bumpkin, listen carefully. I am the granddaughter of the great elder of the Walt family, Sophia, the head of the Walt family. The famous first Marquise of the Hudson is my uncle," Sophia said with incomparable pride. Myra almost laughed out loud. What a coincidence. The general of the Walt family was the very father whom she was reluctant to see. In other words, Myra was the only legitimate descendant of the Walt family, and her bloodline was far nobler than the girl in front of her. If she went back now, her cheap father would probably welcome her warmly. It was a pity that she wasn't interested in being tied down by bleak benefits. Instead, she had a soft spot for beating up elitists like the one standing in front of her. "Hey, you really have an impressive background." Myra patted her chest in an exaggerated manner with a playful look. "Then hurry up and get out of the way." Sophia was still as arrogant as before and actually didn't seem to pick up on Myra's sarcasm. "You people of the Walt family should go test your IQ," Myra exclaimed, rolling her eyes while ignoring her. "How dare you? Do you believe that I won't let you take the exam today?" Sophia said arrogantly. Without waiting for Myra to speak, a few similarly dressed people walked over from the other side. Sophia immediately stepped forward and said to a young lady, "Tiffany, this brat dares to speak rudely to the Walt family." Myra was, in fact, her younger sister. Before she was kicked out of the Walt Manor, Tiffany had been the one who humiliated her the most. Tiffany raised her head, meeting Myra's meaningful gaze, but she didn't care whatsoever, only saying, "A good dog doesn't block the road." "Well, that's not gonna fly," thought Myra. "When the road's run by those without honor, more power to the street nappers," Myra replied. Tiffany looked as if she had been slapped in the face. A man dressed in white beside her smiled slightly when he heard this and looked at Myra with a gaze as warm as sunshine. "This boy is interesting," he remarked. "Brad, do you dare to say your name and tell me whose family you're from?" Tiffany asked. She had not lost her head in a rage. She felt that this punk knew that she was from the Walt family, yet he still dared to be so arrogant. She figured that he must have some powerful figure backing him, just like she had the fifth prince by her own side. I'm afraid I'll lose my life if I hear your name. I'm a bachelor without any family background or backing, and I might just have to slap the makeup off your face if you keep talking. Myra was even more arrogant than she was. When Tiffany heard this, all that was left was anger, and she coldly said, "You, a commoner, actually dare to come to the Royal College to cause trouble? Do you believe that you'll make it inside?" The Hudson Empire was a strict and orderly empire. The aristocrats never treated the commoners as human beings. Myra smiled and crooked her finger at Tiffany. "Don't run your mouth. If you have the guts, come at me." The surrounding enrollees wanted to laugh, but no one dared to. Was she really standing up to Tiffany? "Someone come!" Tiffany clenched his teeth, and immediately a guard stepped forward. But before he could do anything, a teaching staff walked over. No matter who it was, he asked with a cold expression, "What are you doing? Do you think this is a market or what?" Tiffany didn't dare to say anything. Royal College was run by the imperial family. The academy's rules were always strict, and everyone was treated equally. Anyone who violated the rules would be directly expelled and perhaps hospitalized en route. "We don't care who you are here. You're not allowed to enter straight away. If you want to register, go over there and line up," the staff member said coldly. Soon, Tiffany, the fifth prince, Sophia, and Myra were obediently standing at the back of the convoy. "Teacher, you have to discipline her if she wants to get away with this as a commoner." With this, Tiffany pointed at Myra angrily. This person dared to contradict her in public, so she definitely couldn't be let off lightly. The teaching staff turned to look at Myra, frowning. "You're really a commoner?" Myra nodded honestly. "Yes." "Then you've come to the wrong place. The Hudson Academy is currently recruiting students. The academy is 2 streets away. Go there." The man didn't change his tone when he heard that Myra was a commoner. Myra shook her head. "No, I'm here to register." This time, the teaching staff frowned. He thought to himself, this brat really did come to cause trouble. Tiffany naturally could not let go of this opportunity and chimed in while adding fuel to the fire. "Teacher, I was right. People like you who don't differentiate between equals and want to disrupt order should be pulled out. If it's inconvenient for you, I'll take care of it myself." Having said so, she flashed Myra a wicked smile. "If you don't leave now, don't blame me for getting chased away," said the staff member. Now the man's tone was becoming somewhat unfriendly. "I have something for you to see," said Myra, smiling obsequiously. The teaching staff thought that she was going to bribe them to take the relationship away, and his face immediately sank. Tiffany, on the other hand, laughed harder than anyone else, as if she could already foresee the outcome. Namely, Myra being thrown out to be beaten to death in the next moment. Yet to everyone's surprise, the handsome boy pulled out not coins, but a dazzling golden scroll. Tiffany's face was full of disdain. But when the instructor saw the name scroll, he was stunned. He trembled as he accepted it and opened it to carefully examine the contents. Then, without further ado, he said to Myra with his eyes shining, "Young lad, I thought you were just being rude. I did not know the principal recommended you." When Tiffany saw the smile on the always serious face of the teaching staff, she was stunned. The fifth prince was startled as well, and his gaze became even more meaningful. Myra opened her mouth and asked, "Then can I queue up now?" "You don't need to queue up if you have a name scroll. You can just go in and sign up." The staff returned the scroll and pointed her in the right direction. "Thank you, teacher." Myra maintained a humble smile, though she seemed almost to wink at Tiffany. The teaching staff immediately developed a favorable impression of him. "This child is calm and magnanimous. He'll definitely be able to achieve great things in the future." Tiffany was furious. Previously, Myra had acted completely differently, and now she was being fawned over. That was a score she'd soon settle. Myra walked toward the registration point, receiving the attention of quite a few people. Everyone was wondering who she was and why she was able to walk in without even needing to take a test. Because the Royal College was for children of noble families, they were allowed to bring their subordinates in and out. So no one found it overly strange that she was bringing the little girl around. Myra entered the courtyard and started to survey her surroundings. From the front of the gate, she saw the training grounds, where two big stones stood. A white spirit stone was used to measure talent. At this time, those who wished to enter Royal College were all lined up below, waiting to display their talent and strength. After walking past the martial arts practice grounds, she reached the outermost reception hall of the academy. Right now, there was a table set up to display information on the students that were temporarily registered there. Myra walked to the registration table and faced an old man who was around 50 years old. She handed him the scroll with a smile. With this invitation, everything would naturally be easy to handle. Under the earnest guidance of the old man, Myra took the student registration form and walked into the main hall. This hall was a place where the students' strength was determined by the number of medals they were given. She foolishly walked in, and after realizing what the place was, she demonstrated a level 3 soul technique. The man's eyes lit up. Soul masters of the 3rd stage are really rare. Then, not only did he give her a medal that was the same as a warrior's, but he presented a red fire robe that only soul masters could wear. Myra received it, and although she was smiling amiably, there was no happiness in her eyes. The little girl was different. When she saw the robes, her eyes immediately opened wide. She had seen people wearing such clothes several times in her memory, and every time they were aloof and exalted like gods. She didn't expect this young master to be so powerful. As long as she followed her young master, as it were, no one would dare to bully her ever again. The more she thought about it, the luckier she felt. Looking at this little girl, a bright idea flashed through Myra's mind. She pulled her up and said to the middle-aged man who gave her the medal, "Teacher, my little sister is here to accompany me in reporting today. Can you lend her the testing spirit stones?" "Of course," said the middle-aged man, who was appreciative of Myra, as he had nothing else to do and was happy to watch the show. Myra thanked him and said, "Put your hands on that rock." The little girl timidly said, "But I'm not." Myra shook her head and gave her a firm look before the word aristocracy left her mouth. The little girl didn't want to disappoint her, so she bit her lips, closed her eyes, and placed her hand on the testing stone. Myra watched with rapt attention. Very quickly, the white stone flashed with a faint white light. On the stone, a few words were displayed. Spirit Root Level 3. The middle-aged man shook his head. There were 9 levels of spiritual roots, and the higher the talent, the better. Because Royal College was only open to the nobility, the standard for recruiting students was a little low, but it was still commendable. The middle-aged man sighed. You have to understand that in the past there was a female who was a genius of the 8th rank. Level 6 and above were considered geniuses. Level 7 was rare. Level 8 was extremely rare. Level 9 had never appeared in the Empire, and many people didn't believe it to even be possible. Myra frowned. She wasn't satisfied with the results of the test. She felt the heavens were too unfair to this child. The little girl, however, thought that her performance was poor. She lowered her head and whispered, Sir, did I disappoint you? She was on the verge of tears. Myra comforted her with a pat on her head, then took a testing stone and said, Come, try to focus your attention on this. The Essence Testing Stone was a spiritual power testing stone, and because of the rarity of the material, it was quite small, only the size of Myra's palm. After the little girl heard this, she closed her eyes and concentrated. Suddenly, the rock slowly reacted and lit up with a golden light. Spiritual energy rank 3, 4th level, 5th level, 6th level, level 7. Myra waited for the change in the words on the stone. When it reached 5, she was already very happy. But at 6, she was surprised. At 7, her eyes were already wide open, but she didn't know what to say. The middle-aged man had a similar expression. It had to be said that spiritual power was even harder to obtain than spirit roots. Level 7 spirit power would be more than enough to become a soul master alchemist. Sir! The little girl didn't know what had happened, but she nervously tugged at the corner of Myra's clothes. What happened? Well, you're quite lucky. Myra laughed out loud and pinched her face. Seeing Myra's smile, the little girl heaved a sigh of relief, happy that she didn't disappoint her sister. Hurry up and get this child to register. She'll definitely be selected, said the kindly man. The little girl was confused, but Myra thanked him politely and left with the little girl. After leaving the great hall, Myra said to the little girl as she walked toward the dorm that she had arranged for herself, You saw it just now. You're a very talented person. If you want to go to the academy to learn, I can send you there. The little girl's face tensed up, but he kept on shaking his head. Myra knew that this child was treating her as a lifesaver and could only say, If you don't want to leave, then stay. I won't chase you away. But you'll only have 1 day to register, and that's tomorrow. I'm not leaving, the little girl said stubbornly, her attitude never wavering. Myra knew that she was afraid of being bullied, so she caressed her head and sighed. Poor child. The little girl lowered her head meekly. The dormitory was similar to a courtyard. Each courtyard had 4 rooms, and each room had 2 rooms for the students and their servants to use. The standard was for each person to bring 1 servant. Myra was located to the north. It was relatively quiet, and the green-colored mud-tiled houses were neat and tidy. There was a plot of land in front of the houses where flowers and plants could be grown, and there was a well in each courtyard. It's good to be here. The little girl wandered around in the simple room that was decorated while excitedly asking, Young master, are we going to live here from now on? Myra raised his head upon hearing her question. Seeing that she was currently making a single bed, she raised his head and said, If you want to stay here, I can take the one outside. The little girl's face was flushed red, and she said bashfully, "Young master, I didn't mean it that way. I... She was talking about living in this room and making the bed after seeing the creases in the bed, not sleeping in it. It's good that you're not. Then I'll sleep inside while you sleep outside," Myra said casually. At this moment, all of her attention was on the room. She could feel that there was definitely a formation outside the house because the spiritual and elemental energy inside were much richer than outside. To be able to increase one's cultivation speed in such an environment, it was no exaggeration to say that the resources here were good. For the entire afternoon, Myra meditated on the bed while cleaning both the inside and the outside. Out of the blue, she heard the sound of porcelain falling to the ground outside, and then she heard the little girl's timid apology. Myra frowned, but because the spirit energy in her body had not finished one full gathering, she was unable to stand up immediately. She kept her spirit space peaceful, and after a while, she slowly exhaled, got off her bed, and left the room. When she went out, it was already night. The 3 houses around her were lit up by candles, and the courtyard was filled with servants moving daily necessities. Storage rings were extremely rare. It was already good enough for a top aristocrat family to have one, and it was also in the hands of the family head. Very few disciples were able to obtain one, so they could only move it back and forth. At this moment, there were a few steps in front of the little girl. On the ground in front of her feet was a large broken vase. It seemed that these people were moving around, and she had accidentally broken it while she was cleaning. However, the little girl wasn't as troubled as she had expected, and only heard the man in embroidered clothes consoling her. "It was just a decoration. This will save me a lot of time. It's fine. Really." This man's posture was gentle, and his eyes were clear. He was the man who'd been standing beside Tiffany in the morning. The little girl stood in place a little stiffly. It was likely that she had never seen such a person before, and didn't dare to answer. "Since the 5th prince said it's all right, then forgive me for not paying," Myra said as she walked out of the room, her indifferent voice carrying the distance between them. She didn't like people who were too close to the Watt family. The little girl looked at Myra with an apologetic gaze, and Myra gave her a peaceful smile. "Do you know my identity?" Mark Sandler asked curiously. Only the people of the royal family can cause the Watt family to worry, and out of the 9 dragons, only the 4th prince and the 5th prince are around the same age as you. The 4th prince has just gone to the border to train, so the only one left is you, the 5th prince," Myra said. She stood firmly in front of him, without any expression on her face, as though it were an extremely simple matter. Mark Sandler laughed. He actually had a rather carefree and uninhibited attitude as he said, "Interesting." He'd seen how this handsome young man carried himself around the royals, and he was genuinely impressed and fascinated. Myra saw that his expression was real and natural, and she found herself slightly less disgusted by him. "I'll be the host later. I'll treat the neighbors to a drink. Would you like to join me?" Mark Sandler offered. Myra readily agreed. Of course. She was someone who loved to join in on the fun. In her previous life, her roommates loved to get together, so she naturally didn't want to be alone. Hearing her reply, Mark Sandler smiled happily and said, "Great, we'll have to properly drink a cup later." After the servants from the other 3 families had cleaned up the courtyard, Mark Sandler's table was placed in the middle. Of the 4, other than Myra, 3 of the servants knew each other. Master Watt must be really gifted to be able to drink with us, said a tall, dark-faced man across from Myra, raising his wine cup naively. Myra didn't even have the chance to speak before being hit with the peanut. The perpetrator continued to pick up the peanut as he said, "Speak human words." This person was thin and had a delicate and pretty face. There was a bit of a bookish aura on his fair face, so he spoke very little. The dark-faced Steve Jackson shouted, "Bruce Clooney, stop embarrassing me." "Why don't you stop whining? I'm not embarrassing you." Bruce Clooney had a taste of the wine in his cup. His voice wasn't loud, but the tone was sharp. Myra couldn't help but laugh. These two people seemed to know one another very well. "You want to fight, don't you?" Seeing that his tongue was no match, Steve rolled up his sleeves and was about to fight. Bruce Clooney raised his eyebrows. "Think I'm afraid of you?" But before things could devolve further, Mark Sandler opened his mouth. "The two of you stop bickering. Master Watt is still here." Bruce Clooney sat upright without batting an eyelid. Steve snorted, but he also stopped. "Let me introduce you to the third young master of General Jackson's family, Steve Jackson," Mark said, introducing Steve to Myra. "Master Watt, if you're not afraid of laughing at me, then you're just a brute. You won't have anything nice to say, so look for me if you have any difficulties in the future. If you can help it, Master Watt, I will definitely help," Steve said as he raised his wine cup toward Myra. His words piqued Myra's interest, causing her to grin and reply, "I recognize you as my friend. Come, let's do it." After drinking the wine, Mark praised Myra's alcohol tolerance and looked at Bruce. "This is the young nobleman of the finance minister's house, Bruce Clooney." Hearing that, Bruce Clooney raised his glass and spoke concisely. "I don't say much, but he's a good old boy." Myra laughed. She found the scholar old-fashioned and a little funny. She raised her glass nonetheless. Bruce Clooney suggested that they drink together. 4 crystal cups were raised under the moonlight, and after that, the strong alcohol was pouring down Myra's throat. This was the first time she had felt such warmth since coming to this world. The four chatted speculatively as they toasted each other repeatedly. After 3 rounds, Myra said, "I really do have one matter to attend to. I wonder if you guys can help me settle it?" All 3 leaned their heads forward to show their support. "I want to get a noble's record. Your family definitely doesn't attract much attention. Do you have any other methods?" Myra asked. Mark nodded his head. "It is indeed inconvenient for you to not have a nobility in such a strict academy. Just wait for us to help you think of a way, and try to find a decent family for you. Then you can just say that you're their adopted son." Steve and Bruce Clooney, on the other hand, were in deep thought, as though they were already thinking of another way. "I was planning for my sister. This child has exceptional talent, but doesn't want to leave me. I want her to go to school with me, if it's possible. Not far away." The little girl's body trembled when she heard this. She looked at the fro youth under the moonlight in disbelief. She would never have thought that her big sister had so many plans for her. A lone girl picked up by the roadside. "So that's not your maid? No wonder you treated her so well," Mark said, nodding his head philosophically. The little girl felt that he didn't know what to say anymore. Since it's just for entering the academy, then it's fine. There are too many small nobles who are attached to my family. Tomorrow, I'll choose an unremarkable one and leave your sister's name behind. This way, it won't attract too much attention. Steve was straightforward and directly took care of the matter. Bruce Clooney nodded his head. If that falls through, I can help you. Myra recognized their generous help and said, I will remember this favor. I won't say thanks, but in the future, if any of you need my help, I'll always be there to provide it. There's no need to stand on ceremony. Come and drink. We won't leave until we're drunk today, Steve boldly shouted. They chatted merrily, drinking too much wine. After Bruce got drunk, he started to chat nonstop while dragging Myra to talk about the things that happened when he was young. Steve stuck his head out over half of the table, his eyes so dazed that they were almost popping out of his ears. Mark Sandler squinted his eyes as he hugged his wine pot like a lazy cat. This little girl had originally wanted to remind her young master that it was time to go back and rest. But she patted Bruce Clooney's shoulder and said, That's nothing. Even the toilets are better than those at the palace. The little girl shook her head. Her young master was already drunk enough to start babbling nonsense. Later on, she spent a lot of time helping Myra into the room. Myra loved to drink, but her alcohol tolerance was low. So when she returned to her room, it seemed that she would be able to fall asleep the moment she touched the pillow. However, when she glanced toward the window, she could vaguely see that there was an additional shadow there. He was standing with his back facing her, and his figure was as straight as a mountain. The moment Myra saw him, her eyes widened in shock. The little girl, who was about to cover her with the blanket, was shocked by her appearance. But before she could turn around, another figure appeared behind her. He quickly pressed her acupoints and sent her to the outer room before closing the door. The atmosphere in the room was as chill as a tomb. When Myra saw that he was drenched in sweat from fright, she immediately sobered up. But why is he here? She wondered. How did he find me? He had already recovered his face and changed into a man's outfit, so there was no reason for him to recognize him. The black figure slowly turned around, her astounding face still eye-catching under the half-lit candlelight, causing Myra to feel dizzy. She gritted her teeth, telling herself that the alcohol must have gotten stronger. Men and women shouldn't be too intimate with each other, said Richard, his voice seeping out like a cold draft. What? Myra looked at him in a daze. What did he mean? Why were you so close to a man just now? Myra really wanted to curse this being. She certainly didn't want to talk about something so useless with him. I've already become like this, and yet you can still find me? Richard looked at her and said, You're wearing my ring. I knew it wouldn't be good to accept it, Myra muttered. She was still a little drunk, slightly slurring her speech with a comical pout on her face. When Richard saw this, his eyes softened and his voice slowed down. In the future, you're not allowed to get too close to men. You're not my mom, so why do you care? Myra said, squinting at him. Richard raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his eyes released a cold light. Myra stared at him in fear and trembly said, If you have something to say, then say it. Don't attack me. She could remember the look on his face when he killed her. He wasn't going to cut her up and feed her to the dogs, was he? Richard walked to the side of the bed with a cold face, hugged the quilt, and curled up at the foot of the bed. What are you doing? Said Myra. I want to tell you, besides your mom being able to control you, there's also your man. Richard enunciated clearly. Before Myra could react, she felt a sharp pain in her shoulder and was pushed onto the bed. Following that, her body sank, and she felt a familiar feeling, a stupefied state. Richard imprisoned her beneath his body and lifted his hand to untie her hair. Immediately, it flowed down her shoulders, adding a bit of charm to her posture. Under the candlelight, her appearance was extremely beautiful. Her eyes were blurry from intoxication, and her cheeks were red as roses. She was extremely alluring. Could Richard see through her false appearance? "Pervert, get down!" cried Myra. "What are you trying to do?" Myra felt that she was about to collapse. She was angry, but she didn't dare to make a move, afraid that if this guy wasn't happy, she would die. "You are mine, so you can only be close to me. Do you understand?" Richard lifted her chin. His voice carried an unquestionable dignity. "When did I become yours? How do you figure?" Myra retorted loudly, the smell of alcohol hot on her breath. However, Richard didn't mind. He reached out his thumb to caress her lips and softly said, "I want you for my entire life." His movements were very gentle, as if he was stroking a rare treasure, afraid that it would be ruined if he used even a bit of his strength. If Myra didn't know what kind of person he was, she might really have believed that he was acting out of deep affection. "Don't be so stubborn. You look even more like a vase than I do. There must be a lot of women who are willing to be suppressed by you. I beg you, please remove your hands from me." Richard's face darkened and he angrily said, "Who do you think I am? You shouldn't masquerade as a human if you dare to act so weirdly. Do normal men come to women's beds at night to spout nonsense?" Myra straightened her neck and pointed at him. It was better to be strangled to death than what he had in mind. Richard said with a serious expression on his face, "No matter what you think, you won't be able to run away." He bent down and was about to kiss her on the lips. Myra quickly reached out her hand to cover his mouth and said incoherently, "Not a chance." Although she was generally fearless, her emotions were extremely underdeveloped. In her past life, there were so many suitors that she had never even looked at. She had never even touched a man's hand in her 20 years of life, let alone done anything intimate. Richard realized that although she was panicking, she didn't even blush, and he kissed her hand. Myra trembled, as if she was being electrocuted. She wanted to retract it, but she was afraid that Richard would go even further. So he held on to him tightly and said sullenly, "Richard, you dare to disrespect me? I will definitely teach you a lesson, even if it's the last thing I do." Seeing her flustered and exasperated look, Richard raised the corner of his mouth in a rare smile. Seeing that he deserved a beating, Myra finally couldn't take it anymore. She released the hand that was covering her mouth and immediately lowered it, bringing her index finger and middle finger together as she swiftly swiped at Richard's throat. The moment the white wind element appeared from her fingertips, A wind blade was about to cut his neck in an instant. When soul masters performed close combat, it was impossible to defend against them, no matter the technique employed. Surprise flashed in Richard's eyes, and his rough palm flashed like lightning as he clutched Myra's fingers in his palm. A pale black light flashed and had already canceled out the power of his fingers. His speed was too great, and when Myra managed to react, her fingers were already being tightly grasped. In the future, unless you can kill everyone in front of you, you can't use the soul summoning technique in front of others. If the element body is exposed, you'll be in danger, said Richard sullenly. This time, it was Myra who was surprised. You know? An element body's physique was exactly the same as a normal person's, and a spirit stone couldn't even reveal the difference. Otherwise, the Walt family would have known about it back then. Richard didn't answer her. Instead, he reached out his hand to stroke her face once again. Myra grumbled, "I can live a good life without you." "You don't look like a woman anyway," said Richard, laughing angrily. Myra never thought that such a treacherous person like him would actually have such a bright smile, like the sun at noon. Just a casual glance at him was enough to blind a person. "Please, Battle King, can you look for someone who does look like a woman?" she said bitterly. "I only like you," Richard said as he rolled over and lay beside Myra, pulling her into his embrace. Myra's patience dried up at this point. "I don't care what tricks you have up your sleeve," she cried. "Hurry up and go out. I want to sleep." "How can you sleep peacefully without me?" asked Richard, his face not revealing any expression. Still gripping Myra tightly, just as Myra was about to speak, she heard faint sounds of fighting coming from outside. "What's going on?" she said, narrowing her eyes seriously. "Do you think they'll let you off easily if you provoke the Walt family?" Richard said casually, batting his eyes. Myra's heart trembled. This is the academy. How can the Walt family get involved? For the next 2 days, many people will be able to enter and leave the academy. His voice was light, but Myra looked at him with astonishment. He actually knew that she'd had a conflict with Tiffany today, and he'd even guessed that she would take revenge tonight. So, what? Had he come here to protect her? What kind of joke was this? He was really going to pick sides like this? "Thanks to my arrangements, there won't be anyone who can disturb you. Sleep." Richard pulled the blanket over her and pulled her into his embrace. Myra raised her head from his chest and glared at him. "I'm sleeping, so what are you still doing here?" "I'll sleep with you." Richard didn't have the slightest awareness of being a gentleman. Myra was furious. She was just about to flare up when she heard him say, "I'll leave after you fall asleep." Who knows if you'll leave or take advantage of me after I doze off? Myra obviously didn't believe him. "Even if you were awake, could you stop me?" Richard actually had a bit of an unfriendly tone when he said that. Myra felt that she couldn't afford to offend this person, and with the wine being so strong, she couldn't hold on much longer anyway. After weighing the pros and cons, she could only keep a distance from him and close her eyes. Richard didn't touch her either. The battle continued outside. The candles in the room flickered, and his gaze was gentle as he looked at her quietly. It rained through the night, and the morning air was fresher. Myra opened her eyes. The little girl had already boiled water for her and even brewed a bowl of sobering soup. She subconsciously looked to her side, only to see that there weren't even any wrinkles, as if no one had slept there before. Was it a dream I had when I drank too much? Myra muttered. Because she had drunk quite a lot of wine, she couldn't fully remember what had happened last night. Now that she thought about it, it really did seem like a dream. Did you hear anything from outside last night? She asked, looking at the little girl. She seemed to remember that Tiffany had sent someone over. The little girl shook her head in confusion. No, what's the matter? Nothing. I guess I just had a nightmare. She shook her head and thought to herself, this god of slaughter must be a nightmare. Young master, if you have any more nightmares, just call me, and I'll guard you. The little girl saw that Myra did not have any reaction, so she continued. It's very useful. I was afraid in the past, but as long as I slept while hugging my mother, I was no longer afraid. As she spoke, her expression darkened, but she quickly recovered and brought Myra some of the soup. When you have the strength, you won't be afraid, Myra said as she took the sobering soup and began to drink. The little girl hesitated for a while before saying, I don't want to disappoint you, but after entering the academy, can I still live with you? Of course not. Myra looked at her and said, after you go to school, you can't think of yourself as a servant anymore. Remember to call me your sister from now on. The little girl was a little disappointed, but she still responded resolutely. I'll learn well. In the future, I'll even be able to help you instead of being a burden. Good girl, said Myra, laughing. Although Steve had also been drunk, he didn't forget about his promise and quickly found a suitable house for Myra. He was a destitute viscount who had always wanted to walk on the Jackson family's road and immediately agreed upon hearing that Steve had asked of him. These nobles were all very proud of themselves. If Myra brought the little girl to look for them, she would definitely be turned away and perhaps harmed. This made Myra sigh at the mysticality of power. When the little girl entered the school, it soon became clear that she was extremely talented, and for a moment, quite a few nobles who had heard the news came to fawn over her. When Myra came out of her residence, she saw a familiar figure in the lineup chasing the little girl. From what she knew, Carol's talents were pretty good, and she must have also entered the school. Shameless, said Myra to herself. She shook her head and walked out of the academy, intending to ignore her completely. Myra knew very well that her body was a bottomless pit. It would take a lot of money to grow faster, and there wasn't much left of the money she'd extorted from the Rogers family to refine pills. The best method at the moment was to concoct pills. Not only would she be able to raise funds for herself, but she'd be able to increase her cultivation as she consumed them and recovered. She headed for the medicine store outside the city. But just as she stepped out of the school, she broke out into a cold sweat. The badges were all level 6 or 7 warriors, so it would be difficult for her to deal with so many people without revealing her talent. Kid, you killed a Watt family member and you still dare to leave the academy grounds? The girl's voice was arrogant as usual, indeed belonging to Sophia. A light flashed across Myra's eyes when she heard this. It seemed that her impression of last night hadn't been a dream after all. And thanks to Richard's violent personality, the people sent by the Walt family hadn't fared so well. Looks like we didn't lose enough blood last night, Myra said. Sophia said angrily. Just who are you? Whose backing is it you have? Yesterday, Tiffany inquired about her cultivation level and discovered that she was just a sole master of the third step. In order to kill her, she had sent 5 or 6 warriors of the third step. But the assassins were all dead, and they'd all been chopped into pieces and thrown out in front of the Walt family entrance. Clearly, this was a sign of strength that the Walt family wouldn't easily miss. If you surround me with a few shrimpy soldiers, do you really think I'll tell you? So you really have a backer? Sophia asked suspiciously. It's not good for you to know too much. Are you sure you dare to listen to me? Myra slowly walked toward her with a malicious expression on his face. It may not end well for you. Since Richard was involved in this matter, she didn't mind throwing some weight around. If she could scare them, it would save her a lot of future effort. Sophia saw that Myra was serious and thought of those mangled bodies that had been in front of the Walt family this morning. It scared her so much that she shivered. Myra caught her by surprise for a moment, then used her right hand to grab her neck and pulled her body forward. Sophia only had enough time to widen her eyes in shock as Myra moved her left arm behind her, and in a split second pierced a silver needle into her waist. The surrounding guards realized that something was amiss, but seeing that Sophia was still in Myra's hands, they didn't dare to act rashly and could only watch anxiously. If an ordinary person were to be stabbed in this way, they would definitely lose their life. But Sophia was a warrior of the 6th rank, and her body was much stronger than that of an ordinary person. But even so, once Myra let go, she fell to the ground. What did you do to me? Cried Sophia. She felt that she'd been crippled, and she no longer had an ounce of strength. According to the shop owner, this is a highly toxic drug with no antidote. You should conserve your strength to go on a date with death, said Myra, smiling calmly. Yet the devil still stands before me. You actually used poison, spat Sophia. Such a despicable method. Oh yes, and the Walt family is so very honorable sending assassins in the rain. Myra had no sense of belonging to the Walt family, so she said these words without the slightest care. Give me the antidote, snapped Sophia. If you know it's good for you, if you dare to make an enemy out of the Walt family, your ending won't be a happy one. Myra laughed without care. If you have nothing better to do, you should think of a way to cure your poison. Since I've already said that there's no cure if this goes on, you'll just have to wait to become crippled. With that, she started to leave. Take her, Sophia said resentfully. The guard stepped forward, but Myra only laughed, turning back to face Sophia. I suddenly admire you. You want to catch me before you die. How cute. Sophia wanted to say something, but she realized that her tongue was stiff, and she was unable to do much more than groan. In a panic, she stared at the guards helplessly. Guards knew what their priority was, so they quickly carried off Sophia, who seemed to have suffered a stroke. Myra smiled, further provoking the group of people who came rushing over to determine what had happened. The so-called deadly poison had only been a smokescreen. She didn't want to offend the Walt family too much, so she hadn't set out to kill anyone. Even so, though the Walt family probably wouldn't be forgiving her anytime soon, and she'd have to watch her back more vigilantly than ever. She wandered around the capital and finally chose Xavier Auction House. This auction house was known far and wide and had very powerful backing. It was fair in terms of both purchase and sale prices. Today, she was wearing a Soul Master robe, and she also had an emblem on her chest. When the attendant saw her dressed up like this, he immediately welcomed her in through the front door. The auction house was a ring-shaped building, and in the center was the largest auction hall on the first floor. Above the hall was a hollow space, and many small rooms were built around the second and third floors. As long as one opened the window of the small room, one would be able to see the scene in the hall. This was a private room reserved for distinguished guests. On the other side of the hall, Myra saw a sign. On it were the items to be auctioned today, and the rooms to be auctioned off. "Lord Soulmaster, what do you need?" asked the manservant respectfully. "I require a variety of medicinal herbs. Choose a place where I can gather all of them at once." Myra explained in a simple manner. "Then let me bring you to the second floor," replied the servant. "The ingredients here are the most complete in the entire capital." Having obtained Myra's permission, he politely led the way. The small auction hall was distributed throughout the rooms on the first and second floors. Some of them were held by auctioneers, while others were for individuals. Most of the chambers didn't contain many people, but upon reaching the second floor, Myra saw a room that was extremely crowded. There were dozens of women desperately squeezing into the room. Most of these women had pretty bodies, and judging from their clothes, they looked to be the daughters of rich families. Why would they disregard their status in such a brazen way? She wondered. "What's the auction?" Myra couldn't help but get a little interested, thinking that if it was some good rouge or cosmetic powder, she could buy some too. After all, since she looked like a vase, she should also take good care of it. The attendant coughed and said with embarrassment, "Only women can enter that auction hall." "What is it, though?" asked Myra, more confused than ever. "Well," said the servant, "a portrait of the Battle King." Myra's footsteps paused, and she almost choked on her saliva. She turned her head to look at the attendant and asked in disbelief, "Are you sure it's just a portrait?" "It's just a portrait, but it's said that the portrait is very lifelike. There are already so many ladies who came this morning when the news was released. It was originally set to be auctioned tomorrow, but now it has to be brought forward," the manservant explained. Looking at the ladies pushing each other around like animals, Myra was completely confused. She shook her head and sighed. "That can't be. What's there to look at? Battle King is definitely the person that all the Wat women want to marry the most. It's just that the Battle King doesn't like any women to be close to them," the valet said again. "Is he really not close to women?" When Myra thought about the scene from last night, this seemed to check out. The servant nodded his head with determination. "That's right. No matter how many times His Majesty is presented with a prospective wife, he always declines." As he said that, his gaze continued to size up Myra, thinking, this lad must have come from another country. How could he not know about this? Myra laughed dryly, so as not to make others feel that she was strange. "Certainly curious. Naturally, when it comes to our Battle King, the standards are exceptionally high. If anyone can marry him, all of the girls in the world will die of jealousy," added the manservant, proving a bit of a chatterbox. "So if I marry into their family, I'll drown in their drool even if I don't get killed by them." Myra sympathized with the girl. The attendant gave Myra a strange look as they passed through another corridor and came to stand in front of a great door. "We're here," he said, extending a hand. "Please do come in." The medicine store was much bigger than the one in Hudson. What Myra wanted were all the ingredients needed to concoct the low-grade pills, and it wouldn't be difficult to find them here. Very quickly, she gathered everything. Then she took the medicine and ventured downstairs. She originally wanted to leave, but when she passed by a room, she heard the voice of the devouring beast in her head. "Woman, you have the energy at your side. A very strong energy." Myra rolled her eyes and said with her spirit sound transmission, "Nonsense. Of course there's a lot of energy here. I have to be able to afford it too." As she spoke, she took a glance at the rooms that she passed by and grew all the more excited because there was someone who was renting a place to sell some small items. Other than beast cores, there was a wide range of other shabby-looking items. "Which one has the most energy?" Myra asked. "Go ahead, to the left," the devouring beast commanded. The stall owner was a middle-aged man, and upon seeing Myra's attire, he politely said, "Sir, it's good that you came here. We coincidentally have a fire attribute profound beast core." Myra's gaze landed on the pile of junk in front of her. Then she lightly shifted her gaze away and asked, "How much is that water-type crystal core?" She noticed that the crystals of the second-level mystical beast were relatively cheap in the water element, while the fourth-level fire element specimens were beyond most people's price range. Therefore, she didn't even bother to ask. The vendor just smiled. 100 gold coins. Isn't it too expensive? The price in the auction house is much fairer than you. Even if you need to take care of your business, don't trick me," Myra said, eyes narrowing. She wasn't good at bargaining, but she had no choice but to sell all of the Rogers family treasures for 80-odd gold coins, and that's all she had at this point. "Young master, you misunderstand," said the vendor. "The crystal cores you see are of high quality. They will not be sold for less than 100 gold coins." "I can only bid 80, said Myra. In her previous life, she hadn't even flirted when she bought things. Nor did she do anything else to potentially cut down the price. This was the limit of what she could accept. So if the negotiations collapsed, there was nothing she could do about it. The booth owner had a bitter look on his face as he said, "Your price is a little..." "If you don't want to sell, then I'll just wait for the auction house to send me back some goods," Myra said as she prepared to leave. 85 gold coins. I can't afford any less. Young master, you have to let me earn something for myself, right?" The shop owner bitterly laughed as he urged her to stay. Myra started wandering around the small shop, pretending to think. But in reality, she was following the instructions of the devouring beast, and her gaze landed on a black plate with an interesting insignia. It was otherwise ordinary, and even had a layer of dust on it. No matter how you looked at it, it didn't look particularly valuable. 85 is a little too much, all right? Myra muttered with mock sadness. "Give me this, and we'll have a deal." Having spoken these words, she handed over a pile of seeming junk. The stall owner glanced around before nodding helplessly. "All right, let's just treat it as me paying the price this time. Young master, you must come next time if you need anything." "Of course." Even though Myra knew that he was speaking nonsense, she still smiled brightly. The devouring beast didn't lock in on the most valuable profound beast cores. Only these items, which meant that they weren't as simple as they appeared. Can't you just buy it directly? Why do you have to go through so much trouble? Asked the devouring beast outside the auction house. Because if he knew I'd taken a fancy to this thing, it wouldn't have come cheap, Myra said as she fiddled with the order badge. There were no words on the token. It was flat below the tip, and there were 2 protruding edges in the middle. There were simple patterns engraved on the token. It seemed very mysterious, but it could have been no more than random graffiti. No matter. I want to eat it, the devouring beast said excitedly. I feel that this thing isn't so simple. I'll give it to you only after I've researched it thoroughly, Myra said, placing her other hand on the dragon mark ring so it couldn't defer her wishes. Then I want the crystal core, said the devouring beast, taking a step back. No. The little girl is of the water element. This is suitable for her, said Myra, having purchased it for her specifically. Woman, you shall destroy the bridge after crossing the river, roared the devouring beast, started to clamor again. But Myra just thought it looked cute, stomping around. Woman, you are shameless. You are a scoundrel. I'll die of pride if you carry on flattering me like that. After returning to the academy, Myra directly went to the little girl's residence to give her the profound beast cores. But the moment she arrived, she was stopped by 2 guards at the entrance. She didn't like to take the initiative to cause trouble, so she said amiably, I'm looking for someone. One of the guards glanced at her badge and asked disdainfully, Looking for the gifted little girl, are you? Yes. When Myra replied, she was a little puzzled. She didn't know why the man had spoken of her with such reverence. I say you're overestimating yourselves, given her talent and beauty. How could you covet her? The guard's expression became even more disdainful, and he waved his hand as if he was shooing away a pesky fly. Hurry along now. Don't make me thrash you. Myra understood that there must be some noble young master who wanted to pursue the little girl. That was why he'd sent people to block the entrance. That's true. There aren't many 7th grade talents in the world. How could ordinary people like us be worthy of that? Myra said with a laugh, as though she were resigned to his fate. The burly man had dealt with many great souls today. But this was the first time he saw someone being so obedient, and couldn't help but brim with surprise. The position of the young master that you're protecting must be quite high, eh? Said Myra, looking curious. The big man felt that Myra was easy to fool, so he arrogantly said, Of course, the one inside is young Master Draxler. He's very noble indeed. Seeing Myra's blank stare, he explained, Our Draxler family officials are only second to those of the Walt family. The son of the old Duke will one day assume the title. Draxler? Myra pulled out the name from his unclear memories. Yes. The big man nodded, appreciating Myra's expression. However, the next moment, the red figure in front of him flashed rapidly, and he felt his consciousness blur as he looked on in surprise. Before falling to the ground, he saw a cold glint flash across the youth's eyes. The guard had been waiting here for the entire morning, and many people had brought forth complaints about this. However, whenever they heard that the Draxler family was involved, they'd all back down. It seemed that this little sheep was really a wolf in disguise. As the man fell to the ground, Myra brushed off her robes and slowly walked by him. From the start to the end, her smile hadn't changed, as if nothing had happened. The moment she'd entered the courtyard, she saw that the little girl's door was open. From the courtyard, she could see that Milton and the little girl were sitting on both sides of the table, seemingly chatting. It was just that the little girl kept tilting her head, and it was Milton who kept talking. Myra was still holding on to the profound B-score intended for the little girl. From Myra's perspective, when this girl decisively rejected him, she looked beautifully aloof. When she grew up, she would surely be a goddess. When the little girl shook her head, she caught a glimpse of Myra in the courtyard. "Sister!" she cried, forgetting about Milton and running across the yard. "Is everything okay?" Myra asked. The little girl frowned and shook her head. "I still like to live with my sister. These people are too annoying." "Kid, where did you come from?" asked Milton, having run up behind her. When he saw the two standing so close together, he couldn't help but feel angry. Myra looked him up and down, only to see that the boy's body was thin and weak-looking. His pale white face looked vaguely drunk, with false confidence that wasn't the least bit imposing. He pointed at the door and said in surprise, "How did you sneak in here?" The little girl forced herself not to laugh. "Impossible. I sent someone to stop him," Milton said as he walked down and saw the two subordinates who were sprawled in front of the gate. "I just saw them drinking. Maybe they were drunk," said Myra, not missing a beat. Milton swore but didn't seem to care about his guards. He turned to Myra instead. "Who are you? What does it have to do with this girl?" "And who are you? Why are you questioning me?" Myra asked casually. "I am Milton from the Duke's Palace. Stay away from this girl if you know what's good for you, or I won't be polite," Milton said coldly. Hearing his rude words, before Myra could say anything, the little girl stepped forward. "I have no relationship with you. Go! You're not welcome here." Hearing that, Milton frowned and said, "Girl, what's so good about this pretty girl? You mustn't be fooled by her." He really wanted to marry the little girl. Although they weren't on the same footing now, a soul master who had a level 7 inherent skill could easily become a part of the Great Hall of Sages after completing their work. Then, she would be awarded the title of nobility, and at that time, she'd be worthy of him. The little girl wasn't good with words, but she was loyal and resolutely stood in front of Myra. "What a joke," snapped Milton. Myra looked at the level 6 warrior badge on his chest and laughed unscrupulously. "Are you saying that we should compare our strength then?" "Of course," Milton said with a face full of pride. "Come on." Myra extended her 4 fingers of her hand, signaling him to come over. Milton knew that the Soul Master was in fact afraid of getting close to him. "Wait!" Myra stretched out her hand to stop him, her expression very solemn. Milton saw that she had stopped in her tracks. Before we fight, I need to confess something. I just lied to you. Myra pointed to the two big men who had fallen at the door. I actually did that. I killed them. Those two people's strength levels were about the same as Milton's, and they had more actual combat experience. If both of them died at Myra's hands, then how could he be a match for this fiend? You dare touch my men? This was the first time Milton felt that this ridiculously pretty girl in front of him was somewhat terrifying. Myra nodded honestly, then said, "Now that I'm done, it's time to act." Milton took 2 steps back, his gaze a little fearful. For a person like him, who was born into a rich family's nest of gold and silver, he was naturally more reluctant than anyone to die. Milton still felt that he couldn't go all out for no reason. As he walked toward the entrance of the courtyard, he said, "You fool, just you wait. I'll teach you a lesson soon enough." Yet he wasn't paying attention to his feet, and the big man at the door tripped him up. Lying in the soil, Milton looked miserable. Myra laughed as she turned her head around, only to see the little girl's expression, which didn't look so good. She probingly asked, "Don't tell me you like him." The little girl's face was pale, and she didn't say anything for a moment. "Girl, I'm telling you, even if you're looking for a man, you can't look for one like that. You can tell at a glance that he's pure scum. If something happens and he runs away, what will you do?" Myra said sincerely. The little girl kept shaking her head and then pointed at the 2 people at the door. With a trembling finger, she timidly said, "Big sister, you killed someone?" "I've killed quite a few people, but the 2 of them didn't die. They just fainted." Myra explained. The little girl thought for a while and asked, "Did you lie to him again?" "All is fair," said Myra, laughing complacently. The little girl didn't understand once again. "Just don't believe my words too readily, or you may be tricked yourself," said Myra, looking like a big bad wolf. "I believe in you," the little girl said. Then after a long pause, she added, "No matter what." "You silly child." As Myra spoke, she took out the profound beast core and said, "This is a gift for you." "This? It looks so expensive," said the little girl, looking at the pure blue crystal core, which was about the size of a gold coin. Myra thought about the order badge and shook her head. To be more accurate, this is only a little accessory. It was only then that the little girl relaxed and said with a smile, "Thank you, sister." Myra patted the girl's head, then took her leave. She informed the school to clear away the 2 guards before returning to her residence to concoct pills. At this time, there was no one else in the courtyard. Mark Sandler and the others had a wide network of contacts, and who knew how many new aristocratic children had invited them for drinks this day. They probably wouldn't be able to return until late in the night. Myra was overjoyed to be able to enjoy the peace and quiet, so she closed the door to her room, then sat on her bed and began preparing to refine pills. This time, she would put more emphasis on quality, and only then would she be able to earn a lot of gold. However, in order to achieve these high standards, other than the precise control of an alchemist, one needed a good pill furnace, which would be used throughout the refining process in order to enhance the quality. Famous pill refiners would use different pill furnaces to concoct pills and achieve different effects. At the moment, however, Myra's options were limited. She looked at the stove in her hands that she had bought with less than 200 gold coins inside. However, she was short on funds, so she could only make do with it. Fortunately, the pill formula left behind by the original owner's mother seemed to be specially made for her physique. Even if she used the broken furnace to refine the pill, the quality would still be better than average. She started concocting pills, but to her surprise, she was met with failure. Only after wasting a lot of raw materials did she gain some experience and continue experimenting. She reached out her hand and a flame surrounded the pill furnace. Following the formula's instructions, she carefully controlled the temperature and concentration of the flame. Following that, she threw the medicinal herb in her hand into the flame. A scorching hot air current was emitted from the pill furnace and wrapped around the 2 Saint Spirit grasses. A moment later, the energy current began to revolve within the pill furnace, and slowly, the Saint Spirit grass in the center of the airstream turned into a turbid green liquid. Next, Myra threw in a piece of Blood Mountain ginseng, and like before, it was quickly refined into a thick liquid form. Next were the Isol fruit and jade crystals. After they were purified by the flames, there were 4 different colored liquids, medicines, that were wrapped in the airflow floating around the pill furnace. All the other pill refiners would need to do was fuse them directly. But Myra couldn't carry out this process. At least not yet. She pointed her left hand toward the pill furnace, and suddenly, a stream of water elemental energy rushed toward the medicinal liquid and wrapped it up, proceeding to shrink it. After the water particles washed over the liquid, it gradually became clear, and the fusion was finally completed.